My name is Josh, and welcome to Hide and Seek Archives, a podcast where we talk about things supernatural, cryptid, or unexplained. And we are live. Welcome, everyone. Today we have Miranda Young, Ghost Biker.
AKA.
We're happy to have you with us today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. So I like to start. Tell us a little bit about what you do and a little bit about yourself, and then the questions can begin.
Sure. So my name is Miranda, but I'm better known in the paranormal community as the Ghost Biker. And I travel around the country on my motorcycle to different haunted and historic locations. And I highlight the history as well as the paranormal and the travel on my web series, Ghost Biker Explorations. I've been investigating now for a little over a decade, right around 11, 12 years, and started out with a team. And my role on the team was actually as a photo analyst, marketing, and putting the videos together and such. And I found that while I was investigating with the team, I was going out and investigating a lot of locations on my own and traveling on my motorcycle and highlighting the places through my photography. And a lot of the places that I was visiting would typically be places that, were more sort of urban exploration or places that maybe people wouldn't always go on a regular basis. So they were asking a lot of questions about the locations, where they're at, what's the history, if they're haunted, that sort of thing. And through doing that, I thought, why don't I document this through video? And kind of sat down and came up with the idea for Ghost Biker Explorations, and then ended up leaving the team just because, my show is self-produced, and, I do most stuff either by myself or with a videographer. And so, it just took a lot of time, and I was spending a lot of time with the team as well. And so I ended up stepping away so that they could fill that position, and thought I would see where Ghost Biker would take me. And at this point, we're rolling into the 4th season, and, everything is just really kind of picked up and took off. And that's kind of where we're at today.
That's awesome. 4th season, huh?
Yeah, 4th season. It's going to drop in October.
Oh, that's incredible. What got you into the subject? What experience?
Well, I've always been interested in the paranormal, and then just the unexplained and mysterious and supernatural in general. And, as a kid, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother hearing about, different stories from her growing up in the Appalachian Mountains, and, different folklore and haints of the Appalachian Mountain area. And both her and my dad really instilled the importance of storytelling. And so between that and one of my favorite all-time shows, Unsolved Mysteries, I just found that every opportunity I got, I was wanting to be in the library or watching television shows like that to, just kind of learn more about the unexplained. And, I never really had one of those aha haunted type experiences. I was just always interested in it. And back before I joined the team, I was approached by one of the co-founders of the team. He saw that I had a background in photography. And so he reached out to me to look at some different images to potentially debunk some of the images and come up with a logical explanation for some of the activity that they were capturing during their investigations. And so he had me just start looking at photography. And in order to pay me back for looking at these photos, they invited me to go on an investigation, which was at a local bar that was a Mexican restaurant that was on a marina down in Chattanooga. And It was a very active night. We had everything. It was just myself and two other gentlemen, and we had everything from real intense flashlight activity. I was touched. A lot of disembodied voices, which was something, if you've never gone on an investigation for your first investigation, it was a really cool experience. And all I had really known was what you would see on the paranormal entertainment shows, from the early 2000s and such, of what to expect. So I didn't really know what to expect when I went for that first investigation. But afterwards, and after hearing those voices and then going back and analyzing the audio, the guys from the team on that first investigation really let me be very hands on, and gave me a recorder. Actually, two recorders after the investigation to sit and analyze the evidence and write down what we had captured. And after that, I was pretty much hooked, and they invited me on a couple more investigations. And then we had such great luck, they invited me to join the team, and it just kind of went from there.
Yeah, that's neat. Well,
Yeah.
so since you've been doing your own thing, how many different locations have you probably been to, or states? I assume you go to different states and so forth.
I do. I focus a lot on the Southeast region, and I really like to do the local legends and folklore. I do hit a lot of the very well known places like, Waverly Hills,
Okay.
Brushy Mountain State Prison, the Lizzie Borden House, the Stanley Hotel out in the West. I've hit a lot of those different locations. But I really like to focus on the small, lesser known, because really, I always tell people it's like you can't take a map and close your eyes and touch anywhere on that map and not find a place that doesn't have some type of local legend or local story that people know. And so gosh, as far as traveling, I've been everywhere except, I believe, 6 states. Now, I've not investigated in all of them, but usually whenever I'm traveling, I like to at least, check out some of the local haunts, even if I'm not able to investigate, but some of the local history and the local haunts. But if there's a story or an opportunity to go somewhere, I'm consider me there. I
Yeah,
like to take
that's
every
great.
opportunity.
What about like battlegrounds? Do you go out to the Civil War battlegrounds or anything like that?
I do. I do. I've not highlighted any on my show because, the battlegrounds are pretty intensive,
Okay.
but I've been to, because there's so many different stories when it comes to these, but I've been to Gettysburg, and I live not too far from the Chickamauga battlefield in North Georgia. And so I go down there, cross the state lines to the Chickamauga battlefield quite often, and ride, hike, and really just explore there. And then I've been to several of the other smaller ones, Stones River in Tennessee, and over in South Carolina. But as far as the big battlefields, I have visited those, but I've not been able to investigate. I really want to hit Perryville, which is in Kentucky. It's one of the few that you can go in after dark. I know Gettysburg kind of shuts down of a night, and then it's kind of hard sometimes in Chickamauga to go after dark.
Okay. Do you get more activity at night?
Uh, it really just depends. I actually like investigating of a day, but I do. It, the reason I will investigate at night sometimes is because a lot of the time, if these are in a more populated area, it's quieter. That's the main reason. Plus, in some of these buildings, it's the ambient light. I don't like to investigate in complete darkness just because I feel like it's harder to see shadow figures or any type of movement unless I have a laser grid or something going. It really just depends. I find that I get more residual activity during the day. just because of all the day-to-day activities that are going on. But and then sometimes a little more of the intelligent activity I seem to get more at night.
Okay.
Okay. Have you ever gotten a chance to investigate any, let's say, ghost towns or mines?
I have not investigated any mines. I would actually like to go up into the Harlan, Kentucky area. My uncle was a coal miner up there. And, I've gone up and, toured some of the different historic places that they have up there, but I've not investigated any of the mines. But I have, and of course, we have a lot of them here in East Tennessee as well. But I investigated a really cool, I guess you could call it a ghost town. It was an abandoned mill town, Henry River Mill Village in Hickory, North Carolina. The town was built around this mill, and they had their own script, which was called Doogaloos, and had their own social structure within there. And so I was able to investigate there with Soul Sisters Paranormal. It was just myself and the founder of that team. We spent the night, and right now I believe they had, I can't remember the exact number of houses. I think they had 8 or 9 houses still standing in their general store. And that proved to be a very active location. A lot of residual activity there as well. But it was really cool because you really had a wide variety of places that you were able to investigate, because each of the little homes, you could spend a full night in each home just trying to figure out the stories, from within each of those.
Yeah, I bet there's a lot of activity in the old plantation homes as well. I had I had a friend. They had friends who had an old plantation home down in Rosenberg. They always claimed it was haunted, and that they would have furniture moved around on them overnight and stuff like that. And
yes,
and I went down there a couple of times, not to do any, just to. We used to go fishing out in the pond in front of the place, but it was a neat place.
Yeah, a lot of the homes down, here down in the Old South and everything, just have such a rich history. And, some of them, especially if they're near, where the Civil War was fought, just the strife and the energy from that. And then just some of the things that happened in some of these old plantation homes. They really do prove to be pretty active. I did a walkthrough daytime, it wasn't an investigation, but daytime tour of the Myrtles plantation in New Orleans.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yes. And it was wonderful. Just, just spending the day there. It's a little harder to investigate just because, it is a bed and breakfast now,
right.
But you can stay in the different haunted rooms. And, if you're, and they even say that the outside quarters where people can stay is even very haunted. So you could really feel it just on the daytime tour.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think my parents stayed there one time.
Yeah.
I think they went on a plantation tour all through Louisiana, and Myrtle House or Myrtle Plantation was one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that the deep South and the old South, just the atmosphere, the look. I mean, a lot of those, just looking at them, are just really creepy. And when you really start to dive into the history, it's just got an amazing history and story to tell.
Right. Well, you had mentioned more intelligent hauntings.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like there are some situations where they're more aware, and then other situations where they're just kind of there?
I do. I really do. And we've experienced that at several different places. I always tell people, it's like, just because if I go to a location and I don't, get activity, doesn't mean that it's not haunted or not an active location. It may just be, for some reason, either the way that I'm choosing to communicate may not be a way that they want to communicate back with me. Mm-hmm. But I do feel a lot of the time, sometimes some of these places, it may seem like it's not very active, but may be more of just, once you sit down and start listening to the recorders, watching the video, you may start to see things that are more of a residual where they're just kind of there. I found that some of them, Old South Pittsburgh Hospital was one that had a lot of residual haunting. And now it did have intelligent, but it was one of those things where you would hear there was no power in there. So you would hear the elevators go off, or you would hear somebody walking down the hall and like putting charts in the door, chart holders. So I think that, when you really stop and really pay attention, you can really, sometimes pick up on some of these more subtle things that are more unexplained, I guess, that are more of just a residual. And then I've been to several other places where it's almost like getting rushed at with spirits wanting to communicate. I mean, they're excited you're there. They're excited you're going to, well, I shouldn't necessarily say excited, but they're anxious to tell their story. And, so I've been to several places that have been like that. And usually those tend to be some of the places that are not overly investigated. Just going in and talking, I've gotten some really interesting activity that has been sort of, I guess kind of unexpected, but the fact that, you want to tell their story and give them their voice. I've been in a few where they're just eager to share that.
Are most of them, would you say majority of them are more friendly or more positive type encounters?
Yeah, from what I've experienced, when you visit a prison, or some of those places that had negative people in them or more aggressive people, it's, you don't need to be surprised when you get that type of activity at those type of locations. As for the most part, demonic, I mean, that's kind of become a big buzzword within the paranormal community. Demonic, it does happen, but it is more rare. A lot of the time, the spirits we encounter, if they do seem more negative, it may just be that they're approaching you in a more aggressive, assertive type way. But I don't really go seeking that out. Mm-hmm. I am interested at times, and usually each season I will cover a location that has kind of a dark haunting, just because of the story, and just to kind of go in and conduct experiments to see, one place in particular, Revenant Acres in Indiana, it's rumored to have negative activity toward women, and so and be very aggressive. So myself and another female went and spent the night there and investigated to see if that was really the type of activity, if we would get the same thing as what some of these other folks were experiencing. Although when I go in, I try not to go in. I always make sure I'm centered and grounded, and my intention is not necessarily to seek out a negative entity, even though you will get them from time to time. I find for the most part they're fairly benign and relatively friendly.
Okay. What would when you hear people talk about poltergeist, mm-hmm. is that separate? Is that a little different than when you talk about hauntings?
It is.
Activity? Okay.
It is. It's related to it, and that's an interesting topic when people bring it up, because a lot of the time people will think that poltergeist is just a noisy spirit that has the ability to move things around and essentially make a lot of noise. But it's believed that it's potentially poltergeist type activity can be something that there are some mindsets in the paranormal community that believe that we can kind of create our own haunting, and that some of that poltergeist type activity could essentially be coming subconsciously from yourself.
Okay. Is that similar to hauntings following certain objects, or
I guess it could have a similarity.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess it could. They do say, a lot of those tend to sort of be an attachment type thing. Yeah, that either, and again, there are also several theories behind that as to why maybe a doll would be haunted or some other type of relic. It could either be, in one of my episodes, I investigated a haunted bathtub, and it was part of a local legend where there was a monk who perished on a train wreck, and I was able to investigate the train wreck site where he and many others had perished. But it's rumored that the doctor who treated him, as well as the other folks in this train wreck, that he took the monk's body back to his house and stripped the flesh from the bones in this particular tub. And he used the skeleton in his doctor's office. And so I was very fortunate in this particular episode to tell this story, visit the train wreck site, and then go and investigate the alleged tub where this had happened. The tub had been purchased by a family at an estate sale from this particular doctor's family. So, it did match the time frame of when this would have happened. However, whether it's just local folklore or actually happened with that tub is yet to be seen, but there was activity. And so it's believed that the activity, either if it's like a doll or something like that, that they feel attached or feel comfortable with that, or it could be something tragic and kind of morbid that happened with that tub that could cause some type of energy to be attached to it.
Okay.
I've heard, I've done a lot of research on the subject. I've never, well, as a kid, I did go out, or a teenager, I did go out and do my own little ghost investigations, had a little EMF meter. And I loved watching Ghost Hunters Tap. So that was a show I loved watching with my dad. And then, of course, Ghost Adventures for a little while, but then I kind of veered off of that. But one thing that would come up a lot, and I don't know if you've ever come across anything like this, is back to the poltergeist thing, is how some people can create this from themselves. And a lot of people who do that are teenagers, going through puberty and that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And then that can also draw in other spirits or entities towards them. I don't know if you've ever encountered anything like that. I was just curious.
Well, you're exactly right when you say that, because it's always been fascinating to me, because there's like a certain age with children that tends to attract some of these spirits, and then it's almost like once they hit puberty, it's almost like they're like not just ghost magnets, but they're extra hypersensitive and draw this in. And because of the hormone changes and because of all the different things that are going on, they think that that's like you said, it's easier to kind of create that poltergeist activity. My thoughts are, I think that if you have someone that essentially is, giving off that much energy to be able to essentially create their own haunting, I think that, energy feeds off of other energy, like off like. And so I tend to think that could draw other spirits in, because they're essentially feeding off of that type of energy or that type of activity that's being put out. I hope I answered that the way you were.
No, you did. I did want to know your thoughts on it. And I was curious if you've ever encountered anything like that. Anybody who had not an attachment, but kind of poltergeist activity attached to one person.
I'm not sure that I have. I do know a lady who things kind of seem to, we had this conversation and things kind of seemed to happen to her. She had several things happen. One, like electronics would malfunction when she was around, if she was extra stressed, and even especially stressed, especially upset. She even had a hair dryer blow up and kind of catch on fire. She was dealing with an intense, stressful moment, and ironically had several, glass tables shatter. And and there's explanations for some of that stuff, but then it's also kind of ironic, several these things kind of happening, or tools when we would investigate, if she was in a heightened state, tools wouldn't work. It was like batteries would drain, that sort of thing. That's the only real experience that I've had from that. Not so much necessary. I don't know if that would be poltergeist activity, but definitely strange activity following this one individual when she would be in a heightened emotional or stressful type state.
Okay. I did have another question. I'm trying to figure out a way to phrase it. So we're kind of on the same subject. So when someone, let's say they have poltergeist activity or supposed poltergeist activity, how I've also heard of people who have some sort of like ESP or some kind of not ability, but another sense of where they can possibly move things when they get angry. Do you think that's kind of similar as poltergeist activity, or do you think that's different?
I think anything is possible, and I feel like it falls within the realm of being very similar to it, or a type of activity. I know that I've seen several different podcasts where people who specialize in that particular type of activity, and I kind of think it relates to it, because you've got that once things start moving, and that's what I like to really look at, because if you go into a location and people start talking about things disappearing, like putting their keys down or putting their glasses or whatever, and then they know for a fact they're sitting there, but then they end up somewhere totally different, and they know for a fact there was no way they could have moved that. Yeah. I feel like, okay, what's the explanation for this? What is the reason? Is this something that, through the power of the mind, or through the power of your abilities you're doing this, or could it be spiritual? And I sometimes feel like it's hard to kind of explain, if when it's happening, I do feel as though it is a form of poltergeist activity. Yeah.
Okay. I had another question to follow that, and I lost it. It was back to the ESP thing. Oh yeah. When how some people somehow seem to draw these things in. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's ghosts or even I've even heard stories where people attract Bigfoot with it. Just they just have this sense that draws things in. How, I guess my question is, how would you know the difference between someone who's doing it themselves or a ghost that's attached themselves to somebody that's actually doing it? How would you, I would have a hard time telling the difference.
And I totally agree. That's a great question. I feel as though, that's where multiple studies really come in handy, because a lot of the time, you've got different types of paranormal investigations. You've got your commercial locations, which typically is like a one and done sort of thing. You've got your residentials where, you go and investigate these homes that eventually may potentially become a case study. And, then just kind of the local legends. I feel as though if someone has contacted me and they're having, an issue like this in their home, or if, say, for instance, I'm investigating with someone and these types of activities are happening, I feel as though that's where the multiple investigations, if you can go, if I do a residential I will always do a preliminary interview as well as a preliminary investigation before I do the actual home investigation. And I feel as though that's where the multiple times, as well as trying different types of tools and experiments, because a lot of the time, I think a lot of things can be debunked, and or that there is some type of explanation. You know, you'll never hear me go into a place and say, oh, this place is haunted. I will say, you know, this place, I encountered some unexplained activity here. And so when I put that out there, I'm always open to, you know, dialogues as far as, you know, whatever I capture or whatever I'm experiencing. If somebody, you know, who's researched it more or who knows, you know, I'm always open to that dialogue. But that's where I feel like, you know, going back in, trying different things and trying to see if you can essentially debunk or recreate the situation where this happened, you know, just to see if it could potentially be from that person or if it could be, you know, from the activity. Because I'm a firm believer, you know, things can definitely attach to you. You know, if you subscribe to the belief that these were once people, and you know, and there are entities that we deal with that are inhuman, but and that's a whole different, you know, side of things. But if these were once humans, it's kind of like the connection that you feel with different people that you meet in your life. You know, there's just some people you like to talk to more than others. There's some you're more comfortable with, and so you know, I feel like some of these people that are essentially kind of magnets, they may draw this activity out. And it is hard to tell sometimes if you're in a location, if it's kind of coming from an attachment from this person or if it's coming from the location. But to me, to remedy that, I'll even try sometimes I'll do an investigation with the person. And then, you know, I typically investigate alone too. So, you know, just trying those different things to see what you get can kind of help to alleviate that. But that's definitely a great question.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I was going to ask you something about EVP before we do, we got a question from a listener. What would you consider the best evidence you've ever captured?
Wow. Another great question. Thank you, Janet. You know, I would probably have to say some of the best evidence that I've ever captured happened. I did spend the night at Brush Mountain State Prison. I've investigated that location on 6 different occasions. And one of the things that I like to do at these different locations is I like to, if given the opportunity, I like to lay down and sleep for a few hours. So I'll investigate as long as I can, and then I'll lay down and sleep, and I'll put recorder and video camera on me when I'm sleeping. And then I also try to put cameras on the areas going in and around the room, because I always try to account for everything from noise pollution, light pollution, to any type of contamination. And so on this particular occasion, I slept in the solitary confinement area at Brushy Mountain, in the area that they call the hole, which it's literally down in a hole. And it's 4 cells that you're in complete blackness. And they would keep these prisoners in there up to 20 something days. And so, you know, when you're in that sensory deprived state, certain things are heightened. And then also other things are very weakened after you've been in that amount of time. And so I was the only person on the property. And there were 2 people in the office, the people who run the paranormal tours there, just in case I needed help or anything like that. They were asleep in the office, and I went in there and I slept for 3.5 hours, and I got 3 minutes and 15 seconds of great Class A residual and intelligent EVPs. Probably the best one I captured was you could hear these footsteps walking down the hall, and this voice, I think I'd been asleep about 20 minutes, told me night night. And it's one of the creepiest voices I've ever heard. If I had heard it in the moment as a disembodied voice, I would have probably been out of there.
Yeah.
But I got everything from that to conversations going on between the cells. And these were clearly male. And so, again, there were no males on the property. And based on the time that it was real early in the morning. And again, of course, it was dark down there being in the hole, but the laundry area is above, on the level above the hole. And I caught what sounded like the dryer doors and the dryer running because, they've got that distinct sound. And there was no power in the entire building. To this day, I think there's power in there now, but because it is open as a tourist attraction. But there was that. And then I actually just recently found this out. So I'll share this, but it sounded for about 5 minutes. I got this sound of a ball bounce. It sounded like a ball, like kind of hitting the floor, hitting the wall, and then bouncing back. And it was just this continual repetitive pattern for 5 minutes. And I was talking about this on a podcast, and one of the gentlemen, I believe, was, I'm not sure if he was a corrections officer or a guard, but he was in law enforcement. And he said it's interesting during that time, during the 70s and 80s, one of the things that they were given inside the prisons like that was a rubber ball. Okay. And so I knew as soon as I heard it, it sounded kind of like a racket ball bouncing. Uh-huh. And that's the only thing I could distinguish it to be. And so I put that, when I put it on the video, ball bouncing ? For 5 minutes. And it was actually really cool validation when I was talking to that gentleman and found out that was actually something that they would give them. So that's probably my best series of evidence I've got. And I find that when I go to sleep at these locations, it actually works out really well because I feel like, you're kind of getting a freebie in a way because, you've spent all this time investigating. And so you can rest for just a little bit. But then you're also kind of putting yourself in that real vulnerable state, where sometimes some of the communication that I've gotten has been, it's almost like things have really kind of opened up for whatever reason, whether it be that they're intimidated to communicate with me for whatever reason when I'm up and moving around, or maybe it's just, because things do tend to happen when people are sleeping.
Do a lot of EVPs you catch in that scenario, do they sound like they're directed to you, or does it sound like conversations between two different entities, or both?
Both. So on that particular night, there was a conversation. It was a muffled conversation going on between the cells. And I was able to, because I had my recorder with me and another recorder in the front part of the building, I was able to kind of triangulate and really sort of tell where those voices were coming from in the cells. But the night I do feel was intelligent and directed toward me. There was a series where this really deep muffled voice said, help me. And then there was 2 faint whispers that repeated help me right after, which was kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. But then I investigated a funeral home in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. And during that time, it was myself and there was another guy with me. He was my videographer at the time. And we had set a recorder out. We slept, I think, for about an hour and a half. And we actually captured this full-scale conversation going on in the hallway. There was nobody else on the property. And it sounded like 2 men talking, and one of them said to the other, just as clear as can be, it said, can you see them? The other said, yes, I saw them, or I saw them earlier. And they said, are they okay? Yeah, they're okay. And I don't know if they were talking about us because we were in there, or if that could have been a conversation when you're in a funeral home, you're dealing with so much emotion that it could have been a residual conversation, going on between, either people who worked there or really even just family, from that residual energy. So it really happens both ways, from what I've experienced.
Do you talk to them as well? And if you do you ever get direct answers?
Yes. I definitely talk to them. I'm kind of an old school type investigator where I do have a lot of different pieces of equipment, and I will, sit down and use that equipment from time to time. But a lot of the time, I like to just sit down and just have conversation. And a lot of the EVPs that I get are direct, just straight out of the air EVPs or disembodied voices. Sometimes they're ITC aided, like through the spirit box or white noise maker. In some instances, that does seem to help. But a lot of the time, I've found, as far as myself, if I just kind of go in under a calm, non-aggressive approach and just listen a lot and kind of have quiet conversation, I have found at times where I can get direct responses from that.
That's interesting. Are you able to separate in some cases? Are you able to separate the different people? Like maybe you'll have responses from the same person multiple times and maybe from a different, and you can recognize that voice as being one that had already responded to you earlier?
Yes. Brushy Mountain was actually one of those type situations where they actually had an entity. If you visited a certain area of the prison, they would tell you to visit there last, because this particular entity, once you were able to engage in communication, that's who you would get the whole time.
Oh.
And you could tell by the dialect and tell by the voice that you were actually speaking to this one particular gentleman. And we've had that happen, in some of the different locations where I know Octagon Hall was one, because they had slaves on the property. So you could sometimes get slave responses. You could also sometimes get Spaniards, because when they were coming in and exploring the area and that sort of thing, they did stop there. So we've been able to get Spanish, actually speaking Spanish at the location and responding in Spanish. So we've definitely had that happen from time to time, even on the spirit box, which has been pretty cool, which if you guys are familiar with that, it's, a modified AM FM radio that sweeps through the radio stations. And it's believed that the white noise, which, ITC, which it can help in and aid some spirits who are unable to communicate otherwise. It's a controversial tool, but I do like to take that and run it through audio software so that I can see the sound waves and see if it's falling within those sweep rates. But you can adjust to see how much it sweeps. And we've been able to capture responses from people and actually hear, if it's female, if it's male, if it's Southern. One particular case that I did was I was using the spirit box and asking questions to see this was a residual case, and was talking to the lady and trying to figure out, what she believed that she was having spirit interaction from her deceased husband. But the more we got to talking, I kept getting this Irish voice coming over the spirit box. And here in East Tennessee, there's not very many Irish speaking radio stations, And so we kept getting responses. And ironically, the lady had gone to Ireland the year before. She had stayed in a Irish castle, and she had actually brought back some different pieces of jewelry that she had gotten over there. And so we ended up taking the jewelry and isolating that in a glass box and asking some different questions and seeing what we could get from some of this Irish jewelry. And interestingly enough, we got this particular guy's name, and it was in that Irish accent. We ended up going back and researching the castle that she had stayed at, and the lord of the castle, that was his name. And he had passed away in the castle. So it may just be, I'm not a believer in coincidence, but it may just be some kind of strange coincidence. But I've never encountered such a thick Irish accent or anything coming over a radio that's supposed to be picking up stations in the local area.
That's interesting.
That's pretty neat. We do have another question from Janet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe in possession, or do you ever worry about being possessed while sleeping at a location?
I definitely do believe in possession. I think that's something that people have to be careful of, but I don't believe that it is as common as what you see on Ghost Adventures. I think they get possessed about every week. But typically when you're dealing with these spirits at a location, especially the negative ones, the demonic ones, and I am not a demonologist by no means. I have two particular ones that I work with, and one in particular that worked with me on a case, which was it can be watched in the previous seasons. But demons and possession like that, they tend to play what I would call the long game, because typically, they're after your soul, and there are steps and processes that go into place for a true demonic possession, with oppression and, all of these different steps that go into that. A negative spirit can definitely mimic a demonic spirit, and it often does, because again, these spirits they're not the most honest. And so when they tell you, I've had it come across the spirit box, the word Satan and these different negative entities, most of the time they're posturing and lying, saying they're something other than what they are. But they play the long game. The negative ones, they can hurt you in certain cases, and they're more in the moment. They're the ones that you hear about the scratches happening, the choke marks, the not being able to breathe, and those sort of things. So I always do a prayer of protection before and then after. And I always make sure when I go in, my intentions, again, I'm not typically going in looking for anything negative and demonic. I tend to focus more on the historical side of things.
Right.
So telling the history, telling the story, trying to kind of determine what we're dealing with. But I do find that, before I go to sleep or anything like that, I'm very particular about the places I'll sleep at. And I'm also very particular about the types of experiments that I will do. If I'm in a particularly negative location, I won't do the Estes method or the Gansfeld method, just because you're using yourself as a medium at that point, and you're putting yourself in those sensory deprived states. So if I'm in a negative area, I won't do certain experiments that I really have to open myself up to. And then I'm always very particular and again, you can go to one of the most benign types of locations and get something unexpected. But if I'm going to a place that is rumored, I am very particular of who I will investigate with at those top locations. And it has to be someone that I trust, that knows my demeanor, knows my personality, as well as, I know theirs. And we sort of have an agreement beforehand that if anything starts to go sideways, then we'll, pull the other out of the location, go outside, take a break, that sort of thing. So it definitely can happen. I don't really worry about it, because again, worrying about it first of all, I'm going to the location to try to get activity. So I'm not surprised when I get it, but also, worry can lead to negative emotions. So I try to really keep all of that out and keep as even keeled and free of anxiety and everything as I can when I'm in these different types of locations.
Right.
Okay. You said that ghosts sometimes mimic demons or pretend that they're a demon. Now, I've heard that demons like to mock the Holy Trinity. They do things in threes. Like when they scratch somebody, it's three. Three knocks, that kind of stuff. You think spirits are capable of copying that?
Yeah, I think so. I think they can be. Like I said, if you're in a prison and you're dealing with people who are negative in their day-to-day life, they're probably going to be, or at least that energy is probably going to be negative in the afterlife. And again, when I say negative, I'm not talking. Some people will interchange negative and demonic, and I don't mean that in that way. I just mean a more negative or aggressive. You can, and like I said, I'm not a demonologist, but in working with these couple that I did, and I was very fortunate that the Sunset Hill case that I worked on, the demonologist allowed me to actually film the home. We called it a home liberation, but he allowed me to film the home exorcism, and he never. When he does these, he has his rituals and his script, if you will, that he follows in doing this. But he had never put tools out while they were doing a home liberation. And so he allowed us to film it, and he allowed us to put our tools out while we were doing it. And we were actually able to capture some of the mocking that we were receiving inside this home while they were doing the home liberation, which was pretty amazing. When I went back and played it for him, I mean, he was floored, at what we were capturing. I think it's possible, like you asked, I think it's possible to mimic that. However, a true demonologist, when they sit down and really start to study all of this, I think a lot of the time they can, if they are a true called and trained demonologist, I feel that they can distinguish the difference a little bit more. Than for me, what I like to do is I'll go in. I don't clean houses. I don't remove spirits. I don't feel that that's my place. I'm more of the researcher that will go in if you're having issues, or if I'm wanting to explore, this local legend. I'll go in and see, is there activity? Is there a logical explanation for this activity that we're getting? And then if I'm working on a case, if the person can't coexist with this spirit, then I'll gather all the information and all of the activity that I can through investigations. And then I will pass this on to somebody else that is better equipped and more trained to be able to go in and kind of take it from there.
Okay.
You try to spend more when you go out and do an investigation. Do you try to spend more than one day? I mean, do you usually try to spend several days?
If I can.
Yeah.
If I can, I prefer to, just because, no two nights tend to be the same.
Yeah.
There's times, and sometimes it could be feeding off of your energy. If you're tired, it may not be the same, or it may be a different type of activity. If I can go to a location and either spend multiple days in a row, or if I can visit a location at least multiple times within the year, I really prefer to do that, because sometimes, for me, most of the time, I leave with more questions than I have answers.
Right.
What's your favorite piece of equipment?
My favorite piece. So I love my recorders, because I've throughout doing this, I've learned that it's always so important to document, even when you're not investigating. Have a recorder going, just because a lot of the time we get activity when we're not actually actively investigating. But as far as actual pieces, I have two pieces that I love. I love my dowsing rods because, for one, they are, excuse me, you don't suffer from the battery drain that you get from the other pieces. Also, the spirits, a lot of them that we're, at least here in the South, a lot of them that I've been dealing with, they're very familiar with the rods. So it's not like you're asking them to go up and we don't know if spirits can see color, if spirits can see, when you ask them to touch a light and ask them to change it from red to green or whatever, I don't know if they can actually see the color. So we may be getting responses or not getting responses because they don't know how to necessarily use some of the newer tools. So with the dowsing rods, you're not asking them to touch anything. You're just essentially asking them yes and no questions, or asking them to point the rods in a specific area. And so they're easy for them to use and manipulate, and they're familiar because a lot of them have used them to find water. So I love my dowsing rods, and probably my EDI Plus box. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it's a small box, and it gives you the temperature readings in real time. It shows changes in atmospheric pressure as well as humidity changes. So it's essentially, I call it like a little science box, and it will record and graph all of this information out. Plus, it has the EMF detector K2 in it. And then it also has a geofoam where you have to actually physically touch the tool, and it acts off of vibration. So it doesn't pick up when you're walking. You have to physically touch it. It will go off. So I like to always have that in the room because I like to be able to account for any type of atmospheric changes. Yeah. And I'll use those tools in conjunction, and have been able to actually, it's cool if a flashlight goes off, but if you can get a flashlight go off with a blip on the temperature as well as a change in humidity, it kind of helps to corroborate the other piece of equipment going off.
Those two. I'll go ahead, Josh.
Do you ever use EMF or REM pods? The create your own EMF fields?
I do. I like my REM pod because, and it's really cool because, a lot of people don't really realize all of the different settings that you can go in and you can change on the REM pod. And so a lot of the time I like to use it if I'm exploring a really big area, since it is just myself and one other person. I will often leave a REM pod up in front of a camera, because I have several different battery-powered cameras that I'll deploy whenever I go. And if a REM pod starts going off, I like it for the alarm feature. And I've kind of learned if it's a temperature change alarm, if it's a proximity alarm, you can kind of tell, because they've got the different sounds. So a lot of the time I'll have it in front of the camera with either pre-recorded questions, or I'll ask questions and then step away. And I like it for that alarm feature.
Oh, okay.
How big of a EMF field can you put on one of those?
I believe you can put up to, I think, unless there's something I'm unaware of, I believe around 8 inches, 8 inches to a foot. I think you can put, it may be a foot wide and 6 inches on each side. But you can put the field pretty wide from that antenna, high and wide with it. I think it's either 6 inches from the antenna and creating a full foot field around, or 8 inches, I think.
Okay, because I thought about utilizing REM pods out in the Bigfoot field, because I've heard that Sasquatch may be able to manipulate the EMF field, and I
think it's worth a try.
Yeah, I thought it'd be fun to use, interesting to use.
Yeah, I like that for the proximity feature. That's my favorite part of that. But you can go in and you can set it to where if the temperature changes within that proximity, you can turn the alarm on for that. Now, of course, there's a lot of homemade REM pods. I'm talking about the traditional one that a lot of the Ghost Stops and all that sells. You can, because I know some of the others are more just proximity, but that particular one, you can change it for EMF. You can change it for proximity and also for temperature readings.
Okay.
There might even be a moisture reading as well.
Yeah, I've thought about getting a few REM pods from that site you're talking about. I've always curious of how well they worked, and never got to talk to anybody who's used them before.
I really like mine, and it does, if you get close, it does pick up you on it. But what is interesting, I've used it in like houses. I've used it on split level, or not split level, but multi-level houses, and then also in a hotel. A hotel that I did had it up on the floor above me, and was able to use it for that alarm feature. But they are fairly hard to set off. So when you do, unless the battery's going dead, if the battery's going dead, it'll scream its head off. But if you do get actually something, either something is truly within the proximity or the temperature is changing. And, so they don't typically go off unless those purposes. So I think it would be a great tool to try.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever got a thermal camera?
I have a thermal. I have one that works on the phone. I have a flare, and then I also have one of the Snap-on Tools thermals. And I love my thermal. I use the Snap-on Tool one a lot more than I use the phone. And you can get some pretty cool readings. You just have to be careful in some of these locations if they've got reflective paint. Sometimes your heat signature will reflect on the paint and reflect back, or if you're investigating with someone. So I've found that, you do have to be careful with that. But I really like to have my thermal with me. Because I'm on my motorcycle, I do usually have to pack kind of light. So I've gotten kind of good at really looking at planning the investigation out in advance and doing that. But I do have I've kind of built these little kits that have a camera in them, as well as several different tools like the flashlights, laser grid, several different pieces, recorder with pre-recorded questions if I'm unable to be in that area, because sometimes I like to see if the spirits will react different if I've pre-recorded questions versus if I'm actually in the room. And I've done that, but I have this, I call it a military drop bag. And within that bag, I've got my rods, my EDI, my thermal, a couple flashlights, REM pod. There's several that I definitely like to have to deploy whenever I'm doing certain sessions. I even like my whiteboard. I've started doing that a lot recently. We'll often ask spirits to knock or to close a door, or I'll hold up fingers and ask, how many fingers am I holding up? So I've started taking my whiteboard and writing questions on the board and actually holding those up. So instead of asking someone to knock, I'll write knock on it and hold that up, really just to see, can they see us? Are they intelligent as far as being able to read this? And can they, mimic this response or whatever? Yeah. It's worked out a couple times in a couple different places.
Have you ever? Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Josh.
Have you ever caught anything on your thermal?
Nothing really significant. No, I had a couple times. There was one time at the Bel Air house that was kind of interesting, and only because it was a series of events that was happening. It was myself and another lady, and we were sitting in the room that they called the seance room. And as we were sitting there, she was using the thermal camera. We had multiple recorders going, and what was interesting is the seats were actually covered with a blanket. And so I felt something kind of move beside me, and like you could feel this like little puff of wind, and she just happened to be looking there. And what was interesting is a lady had a heart attack in there, and she was the sister of one of the homeowners. And so we were sitting there, and I said, "Wow," I said, "my chest is hurting and my chest feels tight." And right after I said that, we both see what looks like the chair that's covered. It kind of it moved like something had set down, and on her thermal, she did not get like the signature of a person, but it was like this gray sort of blip on the screen. And she saw that. So we did record that. And then all of a sudden, we hear this audible, disembodied voice say, "my chest." And it was like, "my chest." It did not sound like a woman, but it was a female that had passed. And we both just kind of stopped. And so we were able to capture this series of events on our camera. That's really been the only thing that I can remember that I've caught on there that's been kind of strange as it happened during the succession of events.
Yeah, interesting. I was going to veer off a little bit. Joshua had mentioned his Bigfoot research. You know, there's a lot of reports. You know, people who are not familiar with the subject but have activity on their property that turn out to be Bigfoot,
Mm-hmm.
that think their home is haunted or
Mm-hmm.
their property is haunted.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been involved in any type of investigation that you think might have led into something more than just a normal haunting?
I'm trying to think. As far as residentials, I've not, but Octagon Hall definitely comes to mind in Franklin, Kentucky, because they have so much activity, and so much of it it kind of blurs the lines between Bigfoot activity as well as potential UFO activity.
Okay.
And so we did, and within that property, you have the house, and then you also have the slave graveyard that is it's on the property, but it's off in the woods. And then there's a big open field. The one and only time that I've actually been out looking for Bigfoot or Sasquatch was there at that location. And we would kind of do, it was when I was with the team, we would kind of do reenactments from the Civil War there. And we found that when we went out and were shooting pop guns and all of that off in the field, we started getting these strange knocks and strange yelling, or bizarre sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so the team and I went back, and we had been talking to one of the guys that runs the location, and he had actually captured a really cool picture of what looks like a Sasquatch looking from behind a tree.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went over to that area and started doing a series of knocks and doing some different calls. And there were a couple times. Now, there is a road up front, but there's no houses around. It's just a big open field that goes to railroad tracks. Now, could somebody have heard us doing that and mimicking back? I mean, it's possible, but there were 2 times that we actually ended up getting a call back. And so I believe that some of the activity there, it's just one of those locations that I've found in Kentucky and Ohio and Indiana. And as you had mentioned earlier, in Texas, the different areas that just kind of have this grouping of like a cluster of unexplained activity. Yeah. And so I believe personally, when it comes to Octagon Hall, I believe that is a location where because myself, the more I'm learning, my focus of study is typically the paranormal, but I'm learning and very interested in the Sasquatch side as well as ufology and cryptids. And right. I'm finding that there's a lot of things that are linked together with all of that. And I think it would be I think that some of the activity coming from that does happen to come from.
Yeah, I have to agree. And I know and I'm sure it's the same thing in your field, in the Sasquatch field. You have people from all over the spectrum that, you have some just, it's an ape. That's all it is. Just you got others. It's a part human, but there's also too many reports that involve some type of strange phenomena or activity around the Bigfoot phenomena. Strange lights,
Yes. Strange lights, strange smells.
I mean, there's people that claim that they've seen them, just kind of disappear. I don't know. But there's a lot of reports. It's not like, if I just heard that 2 or 3 times, I'd be like, oh, it's just, that's nothing. But I hear too much. There's no correlation.
Yeah.
UFO phenomena. I mean, you see, I've talked to a lot of researchers who have seen strange lights in the woods that look like similar to maybe a UFO or something, similar when they were out doing Bigfoot research. And there just seems too much to really totally deny it,
Yeah, and it's kind of like too when you think about, and to me this seems related. When people talk about the way we react when we see a spirit, I've heard different reports from people. I mean, I think stuff happens all the time around us, and we just don't listen and pay attention. So I think it happens more than what we think. But when you're talking to someone who claims to have actually seen an apparition or some type of spirit activity, there is and you can almost do a checklist with it. The body responds in a particular way, and so it's the paralysis and the freezing that people see, and then also the reasoning where people are trying to reason out, because
rationalize
exactly. And so all of these are consistent responses when people see some type of apparition or hear a disembodied voice, but it's more so when they're seeing. And so I think it's kind of the same way when you talk about with the UFOs, with the Bigfoots. There's too many consistent reports of the way these types of phenomenon occurs for it to not be something.
Yeah. I was doing Sasquatch research in Oklahoma about 3 years ago. And I don't tell a lot of people about it, but while we were out there, we were they called it the mountains, the Kimachi Mountains, but they're really big hills. While we were out there, our approach when we're doing our Sasquatch quote research, they would just come around us. We would set up a camp and they just come around. They come at night. But while we were there, somebody happened to glance above one of those mountains, and there was a craft, some type of craft, just up there hovering up above that mountain. And we sat there and watched it, I don't know, 20 minutes. I mean, I don't even know when it left. I didn't continue to watch it, but it just sat there and hovered, kind of moved around a little bit and hovered. And, I just thought,
was there any sound or anything?
I didn't hear any sound at all. And I really couldn't tell how big it was. It was hard at night to really get a, perception wasn't there as far as really being able to tell how big it was and how high above that mountain it was. But I thought it was odd that it just kind of stayed around that area, almost like it was, kind of curious about what we were doing. I don't know, but I thought that was kind of interesting. And that was really the first time I'd ever gone on I had gone out in certain areas and had some activity, but it's the first time I actually went out with a group, an official, group to do any quote Bigfooting. And I thought it was odd. The first time I went out, I experienced that as well as having them come around us at night and seeing them at night. But it's just interesting.
It is, and it's interesting that the two happened at the same time. And from several of the different Bigfoot researchers that I've talked to, that's kind of actually been the way they've gotten into Bigfoot. Either they've been focused on the paranormal, and as they were doing the paranormal, certain things happened that got them to be like, you know what, I'm going to look into this. And then they actually shifted their focus and really moved into the Bigfoot side. And it was the same with a couple ufologists that I've spoken with. They were focused on something else, but they were having these strange occurrences happening, and they ended up, totally shifting their focus and really getting into, one or the other.
Almost sounds like it needs to be one big field.
Yeah.
Cover it all, the way they seem to correlate together sometimes,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Especially when you start getting into different, types of cryptid activity and that sort of thing. I think that, it's so broad. And then I'm sure it's the same way with Bigfoot. I know within the paranormal, you've got all of these different studies with inside the paranormal, people who really take either a historical or scientific perspective. And then you've got the ones that go and focus on demonology, poltergeist, like you had mentioned. There's so many different areas that a lot of people can get into and really kind of hyper focus within the field.
Right. Very true.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are an hour and 15 in. I think it's a good stopping point. Thank you so much, Miranda.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you for thank you for your questions, and thank you to everyone that tuned in the chat room, and we had some great questions in there, and I'm looking forward. Are you guys going to be at the event in Michigan?
Yeah. I'll be heading up there as well. So I'll be looking forward to meeting you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting you guys in person and getting to actually sit down and talk more. I'm really fascinated and interested to talk to a lot of the different Bigfoot researchers that are up there. I know I'm going to be speaking about the paranormal and what I've done with that and some of the different locations that I've investigated. But I'm really looking forward to meeting more people in the Bigfoot arena and finding out more information about that.
That's what these conferences are so great about. You get to hear some good speakers, but you also meet a lot of new people and make new relationships in the field. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be looking forward to meeting you guys.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. It was a great show, and really enjoyed hearing your encounters and about your research, and looking forward to hearing more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. My name is Josh, and welcome to Hide and Seek Archives, a podcast where we talk about things supernatural, cryptid, or unexplained.